Six Flags America is a colonial-themed Six Flags park that is commonly slept on by the coaster community. This park is located in Bowie, Maryland, just outside of Washington, D.C. I had the opportunity to visit this park for the first time in April of this year, and my expectations were blown out of the water for this park. This park gave me a much better experience than some of the other Six Flags parks I've been to. The park was run so well and was very clean. The park looked great, operations were good, and the staff were great as well. However, the ride collection at this park was another pleasant surprise as well. I wouldn't say any of the park's rides knocked my socks off, but I found myself enjoying nearly every attraction the park had to offer. The park only has 9 roller coasters, including the kiddie coaster, so I decided to throw in a couple of flat rides so we can make this a top 10 video. I was able to ride every coaster at this park, and I managed to get on one flat ride as well. However, there are some flat rides that I've ridden that are nearly identical to the ones at this park, so I chose to put some of those on this list. The coaster collection at this park was very impressive for what they had, and every coaster met or exceeded my expectations. Now before we hop into the video, I'd really appreciate it if you give this video a like, as that is the easiest way to help out the channel. Also, if you're new here, make sure to hit that subscribe button. I post tons of amusement park content, including countdowns like this one, so make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on any new content. One more thing before we get it rolling is that this is just my opinion, so feel free to respectfully share your disagreements with me down in the comments below. With that being said, cue the lights and the music, and let's get this thing started. First off, we're going to kick off this list with an honorable mention. I've never been the biggest fan of Funtime Skyscreamers, but Wonder Woman at Six Flags America is a pretty cool ride. This attraction opened in 2017 in the Gotham City section of the park, and this thing is a monster. Just like the one we have at Darien Lake, it stands 242 feet tall and gives some amazing views of the park. I've never found these rides to be that thrilling, but it is so cool to be above the rest of the park, including the Hyper Coaster right next to it. The placement of this ride is great, as you can get great views of all areas of the park. Just one thing to be warned about is that it can get pretty cold up there if you go on a cold day like I did, so make sure to have a jacket or sweatshirt on hand. But overall, I think that this ride is a great fit at Six Flags America, and it's definitely a ride I'd recommend you check out if you have the time. What? Yup, I know, Mine Eraser made the list. As a lot of you know, I do not like Mine Eraser at Darien Lake. However, this ride feels a heck of a lot different. First off, this coaster looks much better than our version of the ride. The color scheme is actually a lot better. The paint on the one at Darien Lake is partially gone, like you can literally see the silver coating that it had before it got painted, so this was a nice refresher. Also, the western theme is much better executed on this coaster as well. The drop is pretty enjoyable like the rest of the SLC clones, as it provides some good whip. The coaster was pretty rough at times, and it had a little bit of headbanging here and there, but overall it was pretty manageable. The ride seemed like it had been maintained much better than its counterpart over at Darien Lake. I was actually able to enjoy the inversions a bit and appreciate some of those awesome near miss elements. The one thing a lot of people miss on these rides is that they're actually pretty intense when your head isn't being bashed off the restraint. And by the way, the padding on the restraints is pretty effective. I've never been a fan of the double inline twist, but other than that, the ride wasn't bad at all. Number 9 is a new for 2019 coaster, if you call it that, Firebird, a B&M floorless coaster. This coaster was actually the first ever B&M created when it opened as Iron Wolf at Six Flags Great America in 1990 as a stand-up coaster. It was then removed and reopened as Apocalypse at Six Flags America as a stand-up coaster, and was then converted to a floorless in 2019. This coaster has been disliked by the majority of riders, and I was in that boat the first time I rode it in what I believed was the front row or second row, but I can't really recall that for sure. I kind of got locked in an uncomfortable position while riding, but I was able to keep my head forward to the point where I didn't get any headbanging. Firebird was a much smoother ride in the back row, and it even had some decent intensity at some points during the ride. I love the appearance of this coaster. They did a great job repainting it and making the area look nice around it, so I commend the park for that. Firebird definitely wasn't as rough as people have said it is. The layout is extremely basic, so don't expect anything special. But overall, Firebird was a solid coaster and plays a nice filler coaster role at the park. Number 8 is the park's intimate drop tower, Voodoo Drop. Unfortunately, I was not able to ride this attraction due to it having a long line, but I've ridden a very similar model like Canada's Wonderland that I was able to compare this to. This drop tower may only be 140 feet tall, but sometimes with these towers, bigger doesn't always mean better. The smaller intimate drop towers seem to provide even more airtime than the bigger ones do, as they don't break you until you get really close to the ground. This gives the ride a different aspect of feeling like you're just free falling out of the air rather than just slowly gliding back to the ground. I really wish I'd been able to ride this ride, but that's just one more thing for me to do next time I go back. Oh boy, a wild mouse at number 7? Yep, if you haven't been to Six Flags America, then you may question this ranking, but hear me out. This is probably the best wild mouse I've ever been on. Ragin Cajun is a bonkers Reverchon wild mouse that was originally located at Six Flags Great America. Anyone else starting to pick up a pattern here of Six Flags Great America relocating rides to Six Flags America? Anyways, Ragin Cajun starts off pretty basic with your classic wild mouse switchbacks, but then you hit the midway point of the ride and it starts spinning like crazy. And when you hit those smaller airtime hills toward the end, you get spinning ejector airtime on those hills, which is just insane, and it's just such a unique feeling, and I love it. This coaster also looks great in the Mardi Gras section of the park, and the operations on this coaster were great. This was actually the first ride of the day for me, so I was able to get on with no wait, but later in the day got a massive line, so I'd recommend hitting this coaster early in the morning. Overall, Ragin Cajun is a great gem that everyone should be able to enjoy, and it's one of my favorite family coasters to date. Checking at the number 6 spot, we have the park's GCI wooden coaster, Roar. This coaster may have been one of the biggest surprises of the trip for me. I was absolutely shocked at how well this coaster ran. This ride is interesting because it was the first of 2 clones, the other one to Six Flags Discovery Kingdom, and has since been converted by RMC into the Joker. This made me keep my expectations on the lower side since a lot of people have spoken lowly on this ride, so I didn't expect much, but it was a really fun ride. This ride has very good pacing in my opinion, and that's what really made the ride for me. There's a couple of airtime moments, but nothing really to shout at. I think it had some decent laterals, which made for a decently intense ride. It was definitely rough at some points during the ride, but honestly, that just gave the ride more character for me. This coaster was running 2 trains with solid ops, so I got 3 laps on it throughout the day, and it seemed to get faster every time I rode it. It also kept a short line as well, so that was a bonus. Roar is yet another great supporting coaster that I definitely recommend checking out. At the number 5 spot, we have the park's newest attraction, Harley Quinn Spin Sanity, a Zamperla Giant Discovery. Now before I say anything about the ride experience, there's a couple things I like to get out of the way. First, I am aware of the malfunction that this ride had in mid-June. However, I think the ride will eventually reopen, and it doesn't appear anyone got hurt, so I'll still be including the ride on this list. Secondly, this ride wasn't open yet when I visited the park, but I have ridden a near clone of this ride at Six Flags Great Adventure with Wonder Woman Lasso of Truth, so I'll be basing my analysis off of the experience I had on that ride. I was never a big fan of frisbee rides as they always seemed to make me dizzy and a little sick after riding them, but after I rode my first Giant Discovery, I was really impressed. The ride swung very high, gave great airtime, and had an insane amount of speed. Harley Quinn also looked really nice in the area of the park that it is in. I think they put this ride in a great spot because there's a lot of traffic around this area of the park, so you'll be able to swing over people in the midways. I think this ride will be a smash hit for the park once they get the issues sorted out, just like the other Giant Discoveries in the chain. Launching into the number 4 spot, we have Joker's Jinx, the park's premier rides launch coaster. This coaster is a heck of a lot of fun. The tight layout and footprint makes for some really awesome near miss elements as the train weaves throughout the layout, which is something you don't really notice on the indoor Flight of Fear clones. I think the launch on this coaster is pretty powerful. Definitely not my favorite launch of all time, but you definitely feel it, especially since you take it from a dead stop. You then hit an intense cobra roll, where if you're sitting in the back, you'll be whipped through it. You then hit the Sidewinder, which is another fun moment, but then the ride starts to die off a bit. Some of the little turns you hit are pretty intense, but nothing that special. However, the coaster's pacing does pick up a bit toward the end of the ride, which makes that corkscrew at the end of the ride much more intense than you may think it would have been. The reason I don't have this ride higher is because the launch and inversions are really the only special parts of the ride, and the rest is kind of boring. Also, I'm not a fan of the massive bulky lap bars on this ride either. However, one thing I will say is that this ride is glass smooth, and I have no issues in that department. I was only able to snag one ride on this coaster due to one train ops causing a long line, which I'm guessing was happening due to cold weather and the possibility of rollbacks, so that's understandable. I definitely think this model is done a little better indoors with the Flight of Fear clones, but nonetheless, this coaster is a really good ride and fits Six Flags America well. At the number 3 spot, we have Superman Ride of Steel, the park's intimate mega coaster. This coaster's mirror image is at my home park, Six Flags Darien Lake. This was the second of the two, so unfortunately, that kind of makes the layout make a little less sense because ours is over a lake and the one at Six Flags America is on a plot of grass, but I didn't let that take away from the ride. I'll be comparing these two coasters a bit more down the line, but this is still a great ride even though it's at number 3. However, one downside of this coaster is it does have shin guards unlike the one at Darien Lake, which can be a little uncomfortable, but it didn't annoy me that much. One good thing I noticed is that I found this coaster to be maintained better than the one at Darien Lake as this ride was a lot smoother. The airtime moments on this coaster are still really fun, but I found them to be a bit weaker than the ones at Darien Lake. You might get a little floater on the first hill, but nothing too special in my opinion at all, but the second hill did give some good ejector. The ending hills were kind of weak, at least earlier in the day, but they still gave some flowjector airtime. However, the drop was pretty weak, but the first turn was still really intense, just like the one at Darien Lake. The two helices were, well, helices. The straight sections of this coaster are still pretty fun in my opinion as well, just not that special. This ride is still great, even though I placed it at number 3 on this list. I'm just used to riding a mirror image of this at Darien Lake, so it's nothing too special to me, but the next two rides on this list definitely were. At the number 2 spot, we actually have one of the oldest roller coasters in history, Wild One, the park's PTC wooden coaster. Wild One actually has a very storied history. It first started out at Paragon Park as a giant coaster in 1917 as one of the tallest roller coasters in the world. Unfortunately, that park closed in 1985 and the ride was shipped to Adventure World, which is Six Flags America today. The ride underwent a similar process to Phoenix at Knoebels as it was fully rebuilt. This coaster is amazing for how old it is. This coaster is shockingly smooth and hardly has any rough moments in the whole ride. In my 4 rides on various seats of the train, I hardly ever felt any roughness. This ride has a masterful layout. The drop is taken at a steep angle which allows for a nice pop of airtime. The next hill gave me some decent airtime, as did the double up as well. The mountain structure gives a fun near miss as well from the park's former water ride. This coaster also has great pacing as it never loses its speed throughout the whole ride. Most of the rest of the hills give some fun floater. However, one of the best moments on the ride is that insane helix at the end of the coaster that has some crazy forces. Overall, I love this coaster. It is a great classic and it shocks me that this was designed over a century ago. At the number 1 spot, taking the gold, we have Batwing, the park's Vekoma Flying Dutchman. This coaster surprised me. I don't really know what it was, but I just found myself smiling and laughing on this coaster the whole way through. I actually found this ride to be really comfortable. I didn't have an issue with the restraints at all. The lift hill was pretty wacky. I didn't think it was that enjoyable, but once the train flipped, it was just pure fun from there. I don't really know why, but Batwing felt way more free and open than the other flyers. Maybe it was because of the setting, but it felt like I was actually flying. That first turn further embraces that feeling as the train begins to mount speed after the first drop. You fly through that first inversion, which is really disorienting, and then you hit that vertical loop. That loop is so intense. I like the pretzel loops on the B&M flyers, but this is even more compact, and somehow I found it to be even more comfortable. The rest of the ride, I just sort of put my arms out and enjoyed the sense of flight and the forces from the inversions. Unfortunately, this coaster only has one train, which results in extremely long lines, but I was lucky enough to snag 2 rides on it. Also, one more really cool thing is that the exit is really up close to the ride, so that is just another cool touch, since you can pretty much walk under the track. Overall, this coaster may have been the biggest surprise of the trip for me, and I just love this ride so much. All in all, Six Flags America is a great park that I would recommend everyone get around to at some point. They might not have any coasters that'll knock your socks off, but they certainly do have a nice, well-rounded collection, and when you add in how well the park is run, you got yourself a really solid park. If you have been to the park, what are your favorite rides? Do you agree with my picks? Do you disagree? Make sure to tell me all those thoughts down in the comments below. Also, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a like. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe. I post tons of amusement park content, including countdowns like this. And I have so many cool plans for this upcoming season that you won't want to miss. Now, with all that being said, I'd like to thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video.